Work hard, save money, and avoid debt. This phrase sounds so morally correct that no one would dare question it out loud. It's almost a modern commandment, repeated by parents, teachers, financial gurus, and even celebrities who, ironically, have never built wealth by following this advice. But what if I told you that this exact formula, touted as wisdom, is precisely what keeps millions of people trapped in an eternal rat race, and that it was shaped from the ground up to produce obedience, not prosperity? This advice was born at a time when the world was completely different. The Industrial Revolution needed predictable, obedient workers who were willing to trade hours for wages. The educational system, inspired by the Prussian model, was designed not to form free minds, but rather useful cogs in the growth of factories. The result? Generations trained to obey orders, value safety, and fear risk. The problem is that the game has changed, and no one told you. Today, those who save money without understanding the system are just watching their savings accounts slowly melt under the invisible heat of inflation. Let's be blunt, idle money is dying money. And if you're trying to beat an inflationary system with a scarcity mentality, you've already lost. The dollar, or the real, or any modern fiat currency, is no longer real money. It's a debt with a flexible maturity date manipulated by governments and central banks based on interests that have nothing to do with your well-being. Robert Kiyosaki doesn't exaggerate when he says, savers are losers. Not because saving is bad, but because saving without understanding the system is like hiding from the rain in a house with no roof. What no one tells you is that the financial system itself rewards those who strategically get into debt. Yes, debt is a prison for the poor, but it is a tool for expansion for the rich. The difference is knowledge. While the middle class avoids debt as if it were a virus, the rich leverage themselves. They borrow money at low interest rates to invest in assets that generate more money than the cost of that debt. Rental homes, companies, patents, cryptocurrencies, land. They win twice, from the appreciation of the asset and from the cash flow generated by it. Meanwhile, the worker who plays it safe remains trapped in the cycle of linear effort, working more to earn more, paying higher taxes, and seeing his savings yield less than the real inflation. The tax structure of the system itself contributes to this trap. Have you ever noticed how taxes penalize those who work more than those who invest? This is not an accident, it is by design. Salaries are taxed at source. Investments? In many cases, they are only taxed if and when there is a profit, and even then, at much friendlier rates. The rich are not tax evaders, as common sense suggests. They are strategists. They understand the rules of the game that you never learned because school was busy teaching you to memorize the periodic table, but never taught you to read a bank statement. Want another subtle trick? The way society rewards financially harmful behaviors with moral approval. When someone says they are avoiding credit cards or living on a modest salary so as to not get into debt, the applause is immediate. But this discipline, outside of a strategic context, turns into stagnation. Because in capitalism, financial stability is not a fixed point, it is an illusion. Either you grow or you sink. Balance is a point in motion. Standing still is retreat. And this contradiction is what makes traditional advice so poisonous. It sounds ethical, it sounds prudent, but it is born of a programmed fear. A fear that prevents you from exploring, from making mistakes, from growing. And that makes you trust institutions that never trusted you. Banks, for example. Those that preach the security of savings and sell you financial products with pretty names, but hidden profit margins. You deposit your money thinking it is saved, when in fact the bank is lending that same money at 10-20 times the rate it offers you in return. What if everything goes wrong? The bank is saved. You are not. The system was set up for this. Philosophers like Slavoj Žižek used to say that the most dangerous ideology is the one that seems to be non-ideological. And the financial advice you have heard all your life fits this mold perfectly. It seems neutral, but it supports an entire logic of financial submission. It is the naturalization of servitude. And the more you believe that you are doing the right thing, the deeper you are buried in the model that transfers your energy, your productivity, and your years of life to enrich those who are already at the top. But be careful, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is an invitation to lucidity. The game is not dirty, it is just silent. And while you are following rules that were made for another time, the real players are doing something else. Something that perhaps you never learned because you simply were not meant to learn. But the question now is no longer, why didn't anyone teach me this? The question is, what exactly are the rich doing that I was never taught to do? And that is where the curtain begins to rise. Because if traditional advice has you in a gilded cell, the next step is to see what lies outside it and how the real masters of money move the pieces you never knew existed. If traditional advice has you locked in a gilded cell, what's going on outside? What kind of game are the rich playing while the majority are busy trying to survive month after month? The answer isn't in a secret hidden in Swiss vaults or mysterious Wall Street codes. It's in a radical change in mindset. Because while the middle class asks, how much will I earn? The rich ask, how much will this earn me without me being there? The truth is that there are two games going on at the same time. The visible game, where you trade time for money, obey rules, pay taxes before spending, and the invisible game, where money works for you. The rules are shaped in your favor, and taxes are optimized with strategic intelligence. Author and investor Robert Kiyosaki summarized this reality with the famous Four Quadrants model: employee, self-employed, business owner, and investor. Most people live forever in the first two quadrants, where work is constant, the risks are yours, and taxes bite you before you even see the balance hit your account. The rich, on the other hand, live in the last two, where systems generate income, time is leveraged, and tax logic works for you, not against you. But here's the crux of it. The rich don't work for money. The rich build or buy assets. And this isn't a game of luck, it's a game of understanding. Assets are anything that puts money in your pocket without you having to be physically present. This could be a rental property, a well-structured company, royalties from a book, investments in stocks that pay dividends, or even digital properties such as content channels, platforms, or cryptocurrencies. The middle class, on the other hand, is trained to buy liabilities disguised as assets, like a mortgage-backed home that drains your income for decades, or a new car that depreciates the moment you drive it off the lot. So why does this difference happen? Because the rich have learned something that no one teaches in school. Debt, when used well, is a weapon for getting rich. While traditional discourse demonizes credit, the rich see it as a bridge. They borrow money at low interest rates, often with collateral based on other assets, to buy assets that generate a higher return than the debt. This is called leverage. Imagine an investor who borrows $1 million at 5% per year and invests that money in a property that generates a net return of 10% per year. He is making a 5% profit on other people's money without touching his own pocket. And often, that property even increases in value over time. This is the brutal difference between those who work for money and those who make money work for them. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of this hidden game is the way the rich deal with taxes. And there is no magic or tax evasion here. There is strategy. The rich know that the system rewards investment in areas that the government wants to develop: housing, energy, infrastructure, innovation. That's why they use legal structures like companies, holding companies, trusts, and incentivized investments to pay less or even zero tax on their income. The difference is that they learned the rules of the game, while the average citizen was trained to see tax as an inevitable punishment and not as a strategic variable. Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, has publicly stated that he pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. This is no coincidence. It's tax architecture. He doesn't receive a salary. He receives capital gains, dividends, and interest on assets, which are taxed more lightly. Meanwhile, a CLT worker has up to 27.5% of his sweat confiscated before he even decides what to do with his money. The rich spend and then, if necessary, pay. The poor pay and then struggle to have anything left to spend. This is not a mistake in the system. It is the system. And how do they learn this? The answer is uncomfortable. It's not in school. It is in private circles with mentors, disciplined reading, practical experience, and networking with people who live outside the fixed wage matrix. The education of the rich is based on strategic modeling. They do not memorize formulas, they study people. They do not ask, what is the path, but rather, who has already gotten there. The economic elite does not spend time proving its worth. It observes, learns, and executes. The poor seek security. The rich seek control. A contemporary example is the interest of insider investors in assets like Bitcoin. Not because it is fashionable or hype, but because it represents digital scarcity, financial sovereignty, and protection against the silent meltdown of national currencies. While most still ask, but is this safe? Real players evaluate risk not as fear, but as the price of opportunity. They know that those who are too worried about not losing will never win big. And here comes the last big difference: speed. The poor and the middle class are trained to ask for permission, to seek validation, to wait for the perfect moment. The rich act based on information, timing, and built trust. While you do the math for months before investing $1,000, they invest millions in assets as soon as they identify a value asymmetry, because they were not educated to obey. They were trained to move the board. If all this seems distant, it is because it was made to seem so. But now that you know, you can no longer pretend you didn't see it. Because if the system trained you to be a piece, the rich learned to be players. And the only way to get out of the visible game is to master the rules of the invisible. The next step? Learn to create your own system. Because the rich don't live off income alone. They live off the strategic architecture of freedom. And maybe you've never heard this because, until now, no one has shown you what is truly possible when you stop following advice and start creating rules. If the rich live by a strategic architecture of freedom, then what is your next step? Because now that the curtain has fallen, pretending you didn't see it is no longer an option. The brutal truth is that school didn't prepare you to live in the real world. It prepared you to obey, follow rules, and accept crumbs. But if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you no longer accepts that. And the first sign of liberation is conscious revolt. But revolt without action becomes frustration. And what separates you from those who've already mastered the game is not talent or luck. It's strategic education, applied quickly. You don't need to wait to have money to start investing. That's a convenient lie that keeps beginners paralyzed. Start with what you have: time, attention, reading, network of contacts. Understand, investing is less about capital and more about perception. When you start to identify patterns, opportunities, and repeated behaviors behind the scenes of the system, you are already positioning yourself ahead of 90% of the population. The real investment is first internal, learning to think like the rich think, act like the rich act, and decide like the rich decide. Read books that few people know about. Watch conversations between real entrepreneurs, not stage actors. Connect with people who already live outside the traditional system. Digital creators, independent investors, decentralized entrepreneurs. The game has changed. Today you can launch a digital asset from your bedroom, learn about finance from experts outside the bubble, or generate passive income using platforms that the traditional system doesn't even recognize as serious. And this is not utopia. This is access. Something that in the past was a privilege of those born at the top, but now access is here. And what's missing is action. Stop waiting for approval. Stop counting pennies while missing opportunities to build a value machine. Learn the basics of taxes, company structure, hybrid income, asset creation. Start small, but start right. Because the game doesn't reward those who know, it rewards those who play. In the end, there's only one real fork in the road. Either you keep trying to survive within the system, or you learn to build a new one. And no one is going to do that for you. But if you do, the world will never treat you like a pawn again. It will recognize you as a player.